Hey YouTube, what's up? This is Ben from ShouldIGetIt.com. Welcome to episode 22 of Photo Tip Thursdays, the show that comes out every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. In this episode, we are shooting the Honda Integra Acura RSX, whatever you want to call it, inside a parking garage. It is like 10:30 at night right now. I'm going to walk you through two different shots, how to shoot them, how to light them, which is just the natural parking garage light, how to put together this final shot using Photoshop and Lightroom. And then we're going to go over how to do a really simple, easy interior shot using a longer exposure, a tripod, and your iPhone LED as the light. So I'm going to show you guys the behind the scenes with a quick voiceover. Then we're going to hop into Photoshop and Lightroom. If you have any questions, any part of the video, just shoot me an Instagram DM at Acura Photographer, and I'll try my best to help you out. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's hop into the voiceover. Alright guys, so now we are in Lightroom, and I'm going to walk you through kind of my raw shots and then the full edit process in Photoshop. So you can see that for this first image right here, there are quite a few adjustments that layered together to create this final image. So I'm going to walk you through my raws, why I decided to shoot the way I did. I'm going to tell you how to set up your shots to do this same method, and then how to make them have a little bit more of a style in Photoshop. So before I get into that, I want to give you guys a huge thank you and shout out for getting me to 8,000 subscribers. This has been a really good, past few months of growth. I know a lot of you guys have been reaching out to me on Instagram at Acura Photographer, which I super appreciate. And so this video, I actually want to make a challenge to you guys. So I want you to actually try to do this within the next week and post your photos on Instagram using the hashtag SCGC1. So you'll see on my Instagram post, I use that stands for Shooting Cars Garage Challenge 1. That way we can all check out each other's takes on it. We can give each other feedback, get tips from one another. And if you guys have a YouTube account, please leave a comment down below of what car you're shooting, what your Instagram name is, and what the hardest part of this challenge is for you, so that, again, we can reply and kind of learn from one another, which has been awesome. So now that we have that established, let's go through these shots. So as you can see, I took two different shots, actually three, for the first image here. And I set up the car pretty much right under the light. As you can see, I want to get as much of the car lit as possible, and it's pretty hard to do in these parking garages because the lights are so far spread out, but I wanted as much as possible on the hood, so that's why I positioned the car there. Once I had the car positioned, I set my camera on a tripod. I set it to the lowest ISO possible, which for me is ISO 100. Then I checked my exposure, so I was shooting in manual mode. I got it to 5 seconds at f4. Your exposure will be different depending on how much light there is, what color the car is, stuff like that. And then in Lightroom, I played with the white balance, I played with the exposure, I played with the color of the car using the luminance and the hue and saturation slider. So you can see that I pretty much adjusted how bright the blue is. And you can do this for whatever color your car is, or any colors in the back. So you can see the greens in the back, I can change how bright they are. And we've talked about all this stuff in previous episodes. Of course, I did my lens corrections so that the image doesn't have as much distortion or vignetting, just the typical stuff. And then what I did was, like you guys learned in the double polarization episode, I selected both of these files right here. Then I did edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. Once I opened that up, I built this image right here. So you can see that first I did auto align layers. Then I set my blend mode from normal to darken right here. And that way I have way less reflections on the windshield, on the hood, and on the ground as well. Going forward from that, I added a curves layer to bring the contrast up a little bit, and I'll show you guys how to create and use a curves layer in just a second. Then I added a fake brake light using just a very low opacity layer set to 15% painted red in that area. Then I added a curves layer to brighten the ground. This is, again, everything here is totally personal preference. And then I did a little bit of color balance to give it that final look. And then to really, make it seem like less of a parking garage shot, I cleaned it up using the patch tool, which we talked about in episode 4. And that way there's way less reflections on the car, which just makes it look a lot cleaner. It almost makes it look as if the car was strobed here instead of being lit by the natural lights. But as you guys know, this is all natural light. So you did the double polarization. Now let's add a curves layer. So I'm gonna go here into the adjustments panel. Then I'm going to click curves, which is right here. And the way curves works is really easy to understand and interesting, but you just got to play around with it. Florin has a really good video that I will link in the description below, but pretty much the top right is going to be your highlights. So if you grab this right here and make a point, it's going to bring the brights up. So everything that's bright is going to get brighter. If you bring it down, everything that's bright is going to get darker. Or if you go to the bottom left, this is where your darks are. So pretty much if I drag down here, you'll see everything that's dark is getting darker, and here everything that's dark is getting brighter. And so what I did was I simply pulled the highlights up a little bit, and then I pulled my darks down a little bit, and you can see that this adds a little bit of contrast to your image. Now, if it's a little bit overdone and you can't get precision control on the curves, what you can do is just select the opacity of this layer of the curves and bring it down just a little bit. So you can see that this just boosts contrast a little bit. I want to do a little bit more. And so right there, that's just boosting the contrast of the image. Then what I did was a fake brake light. So what you do for this is you pretty much press L to select your lasso tool. You click down around where the light would be hitting from the brake light. So I think right about here is good. Then I'm gonna feather this selection. I'm gonna do about 80 pixels of feathering right here. And then I'm gonna create a new layer and call this brake lights, okay? And all we're gonna do is press B for brush, go to red on the color swatches. We're gonna select a red right about here. And then with an 80% opacity brush, I'm going to just brush in right there. And you can see now we have a brake light added in. And then you can press Command T, you can transform how much gets hit with the brakes, you can turn the opacity down if it's a little bit too strong, and if you want to filter it even more and get it a little bit lower, you can also add a Gaussian blur. And so I'm just going to add a tiny bit of blur here, and you can see this is without it, this is with it. It just adds a little bit more color and makes it look like the brake lights of the car were hitting these bricks in the back. So that's pretty easy. Then I added a curves layer, as I mentioned, to brighten the ground. And so for this, all we're going to do is select the ground using our lasso tool. And again, I'm just selecting really roughly around the car. You can see I'm not even zooming in, and I'm just using my magic trackpad on my MacBook. I'm just going to select around here really quick. And you guys can see this is actually real time. So I'm just selecting around the car. I'm selecting the ground. Boom. Done. And I'm going to feather this by about 60 pixels. And all I'm going to do is go down to curves again, and since I have that selection made, it's only going to affect the part that I've selected, as you can see right there. Okay, so I'm just going to bring this up just a tiny bit, not like super crazy noticeable, but right about there. Okay, and that just makes the ground a little bit brighter. It's totally personal preference. I just thought it looked better. I really don't have good reasoning for this. And then I did a color balance layer to add a little bit more red. And so to do color balance, all you do is go down here, go to color balance, go into which part of the image you want to affect. So let's say the shadows, you want to make them more blue. So you just move this over to the blue, or you want to make it more yellow, you make it more yellow. So I want blue shadows. You guys will notice I do a lot of blue shadows and like cyan or yellow highlights. And then I will go to my highlights, which is of course the brighter parts, so like right around here. And I can make that more yellow looking, or I can make it more minty cyan looking or more red. And I'm going to go right about here. And you can see that this is a really easy way to add color to your image and give it kind of more of a cinematic look. And you can change this up. And again, if it's a little too strong for you, you can just turn the opacity up or down. And then finally, just like we did at the end of episode 4 of Shooting Cars, I went in, I zoomed in really close to every single reflection on the car. Whoops, I selected it with the patch tool, and then I cleaned it up. So you can see all these reflections, and let me turn on my original color balance. All the reflections were cleaned up. And to get this right, I have to turn on my layers. There we go. And you can see that the image became much, much cleaner. So I cleaned up the whole ground. I cleaned up this extended shadow from the pole right here, and that's kind of what sells the it almost looks strobed look because you don't have the shadow coming directly from the light above. And then I also cleaned up all the reflections on the car, as you guys could see. So go through, be a little bit more nitpicky with it, and try to clean up the shot as much as you can, and this will make it look much, much cleaner. So there's the full shot. That was kind of the breakthrough of the various effects that I did. And so you guys can see that for the side shot, this is actually just one exposure because I only had to polarize for the side. It's very similar here. So I'm gonna walk through kind of what I did really quick. And so I used a curves layer, as you guys can see right there, to brighten up the front quarter panel. It was in the shadows, so I just brightened it up. Again, I just made a selection with the lasso tool, and then I went in and brightened it up just a tiny bit. So you can see right here, if I move it, this will make it a lot brighter. That'll make it a lot darker. So I'll just bring it right back to where it was. Then I darkened the rear wheel and tire a little bit to make it match the front. I added brakes on the ground and I added brakes on the ceiling. The reason I did that is if you go to my raw shot right here, I actually had Jan, who brought his car out, huge shout out to Jan. I had him turn on the brakes by just stepping on it, and you can see that the brakes actually hit the ceiling and the ground right here, and so I just redid that in Photoshop. And the reason I didn't just use this exposure is one, it's brighter, and two, I would have to move it because as you can see, the car moves when you have a passenger in it, and so I decided to just create the effect in Photoshop. Then I set the brightness and contrast of the background. So again, I just selected everything, then I went to brightness and contrast and adjusted it. And so a lot of these Photoshop adjustment layers, the way to do it is just create a selection using the lasso tool, feather it, and then select what adjustment you want to make. And I really recommend you guys spend like a couple hours just playing with the various adjustments that you can do. So I did that to the background, and so you can see that this pretty much made everything look a little bit sharper and darker. It made the car pop out a little bit more. Then I changed the hue and saturation to desaturate it because the ground was a little too orange for my liking. Then I played with the color balance to add a little bit more red into it. And then I used curves to darken the entire image. So you can see this is before, this is after. So the car looks more well lit. It looks more even because I darkened the rear of the car and I changed up the colors. Totally personal preference. If you like the greens, you can leave it the way it is, or you can add the color balance and make it a little bit more red or blue or orange, or really whatever theme you want to give the image, you can do. And then for the final image, I did the interior, and this is really what I want to see from you guys, and this is what we talked about in episode 1. You can see, so this image right here, this was just natural light. This is at 10 seconds exposure, f8, also in the same parking lot. And then this image is with the iPhone LED set to maximum brightness and just moving my iPhone in circles, as you guys can see right here. So this adds a good amount of light to the details. You can see a lot more on the steering wheel. You can see more on the passenger footwell. But like we talked about in episode 1, the easiest way to clean stuff up in Photoshop is to just clean it up in real life. And so I did the same images again. I took out the USB cable right here. I took out the keys, and that way the image was much cleaner. But I was missing the red lights from the gauges. So in Photoshop, what I did was I went in and I just merged the two images together. So you can see this is the gauges shot. So if I disable this layer right here, that's the shot right there with the gauges on, with the key in, with the super long lanyard, as you can see. And then here's the shot without it. And all I did was I applied a layer mask that we've talked about in so many episodes of shooting cars. And then I got the red light from the gauges, saved it, and went into Photoshop. And so, and it went into Lightroom. And so now these images are done. And what I can do is select the final images to export. So you can see that I have them right here. I can right click, export. And then a lot of you guys have asked me about sizing. So this is Instagram test. And for Instagram, I size my images to have the long edge right here. So you probably have width and height selected. Hit resize to fit, hit long edge, and then 2448 for the long edge, because Instagram's largest image you can post is 2448 by 2448 square. And so if you do this, the longest part will fit into Instagram when you click that do not crop button. Then I hit export, I send it to my phone either through AirDrop or iMessage, and then I post it for you guys to see. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Shooting Cars. Hopefully you learned from it. Make sure to play around with various adjustment layers in Photoshop. If you have any questions, again, shoot me an Instagram DM at acarphotographer. Post your take on this challenge with the hashtag SCGC1, and I will see you guys next week for yet another episode of Shooting Cars. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Have a great week. Peace.